Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Hope you all are fine with the grace of Almighty Allah. I'm Muhammad Khalid, and today we are going to cover week 15, lesson 29 and 30. Our discussion topic is the dynamics of Pakistan's foreign policy. Dear students, since we are having extensive discussions about geography of Pakistan and the border issues crucial for the security, these both the terms and concepts are extraordinary bulged, mean enlarged, that some have to go in depth and explore a huge data scattered in form of policies, statutes, pacts that a country makes with the other, border skirmishes, bilateral ties, a visit of the heads of the states. So the foreign policy and foreign relations or international relations is very important. Before I go in depth, let me define the word foreign policy. In simplest form, foreign policy is the statement of a complete program and steps that a country opts and practices inland and overseas to secure her interests. क्लियर? मतलब यह है कि फॉरेन पॉलिसी से मुराद किसी भी मुल्क के वो प्रोग्राम होता है, वो उनका लाए अमल होता है और वो इक़दामात होते हैं जो वो मुल्क अपने मुल्क के अंदर, अपनी सरजमीन में और दूसरे मुल्कों की सरजमीन में सरंजाम देता है ताकि अपने मफादात का तहफ़्फ़ुज़ कर सके. This complete procedure and statement is called foreign policy. Clear? The other definitions of the foreign policy may be the development of cordial relations with the neighboring states or the states where a country has interest in terms of defense, culture, trade, technology, tourism and many ways. Fine. कि या फिर किसी भी दूसरे मुल्क के साथ या ममालिक के साथ जो इर्द गिर्द वाक़या हों या जिनके साथ तजारत रखनी हो, जिनके साथ कोई सयाहती ताल्लुक़ रखना हो या जिनसे हम कोई कारोबार कर रहे हों, जिनसे कुछ चीज़ इंपोर्ट कर रहे हों, एक्सपोर्ट कर रहे हों, ठीक है, उन मुल्कों के साथ अच्छे ताल्लुकात को बना के रखना. दिस इज कॉल्ड foreign policy. Fine, in simple words. And just read this definition and you will be more clear that a foreign policy is just like a plan or a program of one country. Like, it is an known fact that the formation of a government is essential to run a state, and state can live without maintaining interstate relations, which have become so essential these days. To that end, every government has to formulate a foreign policy like internal and domestic policies, industrial policies, agriculture policy, defense policy, education policy, labor policy, extra. As for example, a state gives special and careful formulation and successful execution of its foreign policy. मतलब ये है कि just like the domestic policies that a country or a government establishes for the protection and promotion of their own individuals, similarly, at larger or mega scale, a country have to look after the interests overseas or on the other lands. Uh, let's, for example, I give you example that do you think and you find that on all international affairs, Americans, Israelis, or the Western people come in front, whether it is the matter in Asia, it is the matter in Africa, it is the matter in Europe, it is the matter everywhere. Why these countries do come forward and uh, give a special attention? Clear? So, by exploring in depth the reasons they forge into the interest of the other countries, we have to examine their foreign policy, their interests on the other lands. Clear? So these questions are very important. Let's examine the history of the foreign policy. Just like we live in a street, in a house, and we are not alone. Okay? In neighbors, we find different people are living, poor and rich. Fine. Similarly, we cannot live in exclusion. We have to talk to our neighbors. Sometimes we borrow something, sometimes we seek help. Okay, often when we are not at home, we ask our neighbors to look after our property. So, what is this? Just like this, a country needs the neighboring countries, the neighboring states to help out, to assist in certain things. Clear? So, just like we in a family domain try to develop uh, better relations with our neighbors so that whenever a time comes, they must be standing by us. Fine. Similarly, a country have to find out and chalk out good relations with the other countries. Fine. And secondly, not all the countries are your friends. And it has been observed that the neighboring countries are the worst friends, are the worst enemies, right? Rather than a distinct country. For example, Pakistan doesn't have any threat from Australia directly, maybe, as the threat Pakistan may face from India, especially, or from Afghanistan, or in the most recent part, Pakistan was having a threat from Iran, and in the past, in Soviet era, when Russians captured Afghanistan and planned to forge into Pakistan in General Zia's time. I mean, it was 80s when this happened. So, similar example you find that Venezuela is not threatened by Pakistan, or by any Arab country. Rather, it is severely being threatened by the Americans, right? Similarly, you find that these rivalries, these problems, these issues are everywhere in the country. That is a huge reason behind. We will discuss those reasons that why the foreign policy has got a special concern these days. Well, secondly, economic issues may be the problem, may be a source that have to develop good relations. For example, Afghanistan is a landlocked country, and most of its trade was executed via Iran and Pakistan. Thereby, their countries have been linked for centuries with this with these countries. Clear? Now, when they are devising their relations, they would definitely keep in mind the interest of theirs. Fine. So that is another component of the foreign policy, that when you are dependent on the other country. Cultural relations, for example, or religious relations. For example, Japanese and Pakistanis have no comparison at all. Yet, because most of the Japanese are Buddhist by practice, and their sacred places, fortunately, are within Pakistan, thereby they prefer to Pakistan in many ways. Fine. Similarly, Pakistan's relation with Saudi Arabia, they are manifold. Fine. Pakistan relations with the other world. Clear? So a foreign policy is a complete plan of action on which the entire government machinery, system, and circumstances, they have to be keenly observed. Experts are appointed, because success of the foreign policy is the success of the state, whereas the success, the failure of the foreign policy is the failure of everything. Fortunately and unfortunately, in the present times, Pakistan was facing in previous years the worst foreign policy with the other countries, especially on many fronts. For example, Pakistan were facing lots of complex issues. Number one, terrorism. In war against terrorism, as frontline ally of the Americans, we sacrificed the most, but unfortunately, Americans and the West impute Pakistan for being double cross, and their people or the officials are openly uh, intimidating Pakistan for lodging a conspiracy or kind of sneaking war. Secondly, Pakistan itself has been subjected to a long saga of terrorism. Uh, Indian coercion and capturing, changing the status of Kashmir by 370, and changing the geographical and the Jew or the status of the Muslims in Kashmir and with the certain demographics. These are the major concern that Pakistan is facing, and in context to these concerns, Pakistan was trying to establish a foreign policy, but now in the present era, foreign policy have been much improved. Yet the challenges are there. The greatest challenge is uh, Kashmir issue. Secondly, China and Indian clash on Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim, plus the accession. There is the military escalations, and so many casualties have been reported. Americans' war against China in the South China Sea, and especially in the Indian Ocean, and uh, meant defeating China on the economical fronts. Israelis and Arabian countries alliance and developing of the bilateral relations, exclusion of Pakistan from certain points. These are the biggest issues have to be made part of the foreign policy. I hope this that you have understood this. In the second video, we'll discuss the components of the foreign policy in detail. Thank you.